to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com. It can be heard live every Thursday evening right here on the Inception Radio Network from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. A couple of quick announcements. If you've missed an episode, you can go to the Just Energy Radio webpage. That's www.justenergyradio.com, and check out our over 6 years worth of archives. And you can sign up for our weekly newsletter, or you can go to our YouTube page, Just Energy Radio, and subscribe to our channel. Or we have so many options here. You can download the Inception Radio app so that you can listen to this show in the archives or live, or any of the other great programming that's happening here on Inception Radio Network, such as, boy, this is just such a great segue, such as this Monday night, I will be the guest host on Epic Voyages Radio that's airing live at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. No, 9 p.m. It's on Monday night right after Jerry Pippin. If you're a regular listener, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, but it's going to be me and Jim Mars talking about his new book on the occult. It's going to be really exciting because Jim's a cool guy and he's going to have to put up with me. And it's going to be great. Monday night, right after Jerry Pippin, Epic Voyages Radio. All right, so let me tell you about our next guest, Jim Stein, and get him on the air. So Jim Stein is the author of more than 30 research articles in mathematics and has served on several state and national committees on mathematics education. Several years ago, he started writing books on mathematics and science, including How Math Explains the World, How Math Can Save Your Life, The Right Decision, and Cosmic Numbers, the Numbers That Define Our Universe. It was during the writing of How Math Explains the World that he had the idea that led to the writing of the Paranormal Equation. So the author of the Paranormal Equation, a new scientific perspective on remote viewing, clairvoyance, and other inexplicable phenomena, Jim Stein. Hey, Jim, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Rita, and thank you so much for inviting me on your program.
Well, I'm very glad to have you on here. Can I just really be honest? I kind of feel bad. You know, it's kind of, you're coming in after Russell Targ, and I'm like, okay, sorry.
Well,
but you're just going to have to, keep the energy going here.
Well, I think I can do that as long as, I live in California and Los Angeles, and we say that if you're in the acting business, as long as you don't follow children or animals, you're fine.
Well, okay. Sometimes, I always have little notes, and, I can read it now. Well, I'm sitting there going, as a Martha, what? As a mathematician, that's the word. How did you become interested in the paranormal?
Well, actually, I think I was interested in the paranormal from childhood for a couple of reasons. I was always interested in reading science fiction, and when I was about, early teenager, I read a book called Slan, which was written by A.E. Van Vogt, who was one of the great science fiction writers of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And it described the adventures of a young girl who was a telepath in a society that hunted down telepaths as if they were enemies of the state. And I think if I were to look at the novel now, I might say, okay, it's sort of an allegory for what was going on in the world at that time. But I fell in love with the heroine, and just the idea of telepathy, that there could be extensions to the range of human abilities, I found that fascinating. And as I got more interested in science, I learned that scientists, and some very eminent scientists, have been extremely interested in the paranormal and the supernatural. And I wondered how this sort of squared with the traditional scientific outlook, which is generally one of skepticism. But I found that when I was, as you mentioned, when I was writing How Math Explains the World, shameless plug here, I had an idea that I think explains why paranormal phenomena and supernatural phenomena can exist in our particular universe. And it's a little different from your guest of the last hour. And I think in order for your listeners to understand the difference, there's a story that math teachers tell about the difference between engineers, physicists, and mathematicians. And all three of them are going to a job interview, and they're taken to a room, and in the room there's a fire burning, and there's a bucket of water. And they walk in the room, and the engineer looks at it, grabs the bucket, fills it with water, dumps it on the fire until it leaves, and walks out. And the physicist walks into the same room and calculates the rate of spread of the fire, the volume of the bucket, fills it with precisely enough water to just extinguishing the fire, pours the water on the fire, and leaves. And the mathematician walks into the room, looks at the fire, looks at the bucket, looks at the water, sees that enough water exists to put out the fire, and leaves. And that sort of explains the way mathematicians look at things. We're not so much capable of finding exact solutions to problems as we are demonstrating that there may well be solutions to problems that we're currently unable to find. That's sort of my take on the way that paranormal phenomena exist. And in order to explain where I got this idea from, I do need to talk a very, very little bit about mathematics. And I've discovered that when you talk about mathematics, you can get hit shows such as Numbers. When you actually get on there and start scribbling the equations on the board, you get everybody to leave you in droves. So I just want you to know that I'm not going to do any mathematics here, but I am going to talk about something that you learn when you're in high school. You learn something called the Pythagorean theorem. And even if you don't remember it, it deals with right triangles. It's a truth that was discovered about 500 years before the birth of Christ. And what makes it interesting is that it's a truth about every single right triangle. And if you think about it, you can't get that truth by going around and examining every single right triangle because there are infinitely many of them and there just isn't time. So what mathematics has to do in order to establish its truths, for the most part, is that it's got to prove things logically. And mathematics always thought that, okay, if there are true statements in mathematics, like the Pythagorean theorem, you'll be able to find an argument to establish that it's true. Now, it's certainly possible that there are a lot of truths about mathematics that we're never going to be able to prove simply because there are a lot of truths about mathematics. And we're a species that there aren't many mathematicians. We've only been doing this for a few hundred years, and so we just might not get around to it. We might not look under that particular rock. But mathematicians always felt that if something was true, we would be able to prove it. And in a staggering insight, in the 1930s, an Austrian mathematician showed that there were mathematical truths that we would never be able to prove. And that's not a mystical statement at all. What it is it's a statement about the limitations of logic. And logic is the fundamental tool that mathematics and also the sciences have at their disposal. And it occurred to me that because what is happening in science is that we are dealing with things that mathematics talks about when it talks about numbers, because numbers are what we use to measure stuff with. And we measure force, we measure energy, we measure mass, we measure length, we measure time, we measure information flow. We measure all these things. We do it all by means of numbers. And if there are truths about numbers that we'll never be able to prove, by extension, there are going to be proofs about the things that make up our universe that we're never going to be able to prove either. And those are the things that I think might impinge upon the ideas of paranormal or supernatural phenomena.
So can I say that some of that just went whoosh, right over my head? I will tell you that I did not do very good in math in high school because I didn't care about X. Although I will redeem myself here. I actually went back and took algebra over in college, and I realized it really wasn't very hard.
No, it's not. A lot of people get psyched out by this stuff simply because it requires them to think within a particular framework. But the idea is really, really simple. Mathematics proves stuff. That's what it does. Just like engineering builds stuff, and physics finds out laws of the universe. Everybody, each area of endeavor, psychologists work with understanding how people react with one another. Sociologists work with societies and groups of people as a whole. Everybody has things that they study. What mathematics studies is truth about numbers, truth about triangles, and just as, if you're a psychologist, what you probably do is you probably think, okay, there are some truths about people that, because people are so very complicated, we're never going to be able to learn. And mathematicians always had a sort of the opposite view about numbers. There were truths about numbers, and we might not get around to it, but if we just had time, we'd be able to prove it. And that's the difference that happened in the 1930s. Turns out that there are mathematical truths that are beyond our ability to actually prove. In other words, there are truths that we will never know are truths. And that's pretty astounding.
Like what, though? I mean, are we talking about this paranormal phenomena, or is there other stuff that we're talking about?
Well, do you remember what I said about the mathematician walking into the room and seeing that there was enough water to exist to put out the fire, but didn't do anything about it? It's the same thing here, is that we know that there are mathematical truths that cannot be proved. We've actually established a few of them in a very, very limited fashion because it's a young field, and although the truths that we've found that cannot be proven, they're technical, and it wouldn't be of interest to your listeners to explain them, and I'm not sure that I could explain them in such a way that they could understand them. But the important thing is, like the X-Files, we know the truths are out there. But the fact is that the investigators in the X-Files were hoping to find the truths. In mathematics, we now know that there are certain truths out there that we'll never be able to know. And if those truths apply to things to which mathematics apply, and, when you study numbers, you don't just study the 2 plus 3 equals 5 because this is a fascinating fact. You study it because if you buy something for $2, and you buy another thing for $3, they're going to ask you for a $5 bill when the time comes to pay for it. So mathematical truths have applications to the real world. And if there are mathematical truths that we can never know, those may very well have applications to the real world too.
Well, I'm just going to be a little facetious here, but can't they just make up a couple of extra little letters or triangle, doodah things and make it be true?
No. It's it is possible under certain sets of circumstances to add hypotheses which make things true. That's happened in mathematics. It happened in geometry. We used to think that the basic geometry was flat, and that's what the Greeks thought. And as we learned more about the way the universe could be, we discovered that you could add different hypotheses which create different geometries and different mathematical systems. But the fact is that we're stuck with a universe in which you have to measure things by the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And so you just can't add you can't add things to that because that's how you count stuff.
Okay, but let me kind of phrase, my little facetious comment in a different way. I mean, in recent years, we've come to, I'm going to say, understand quantum physics, and, there's the whole string theory, which I'm assuming has a very mathematical base.
So does quantum mechanics.
Excuse me?
So does quantum mechanics.
Right, but I mean, that's kind of where I'm going.
Sure.
So as we start learning more about, and I'm going to say the physical universe, but it might be about electromagnetic radiation, whatever that is. And we, don't you think that in time, as we investigate these areas, that these unknown, that these hypothetical things or things that we don't even have any kind of value for might become known so that we could apply math to it at some point in time?
Some things very definitely. In fact, the history of humanity is the history of progress on all sorts of levels. Many of the things that we look at today would have been viewed as supernatural from the standpoint of the 16th or 17th century. And certainly some of the things that we look at today as utterly mysterious will turn out to be very simple centuries or millennia from now. But on the other hand, there will be things that we will never know. That is the great result that was proved in the 1930s. We may suspect them, but they will never be known simply because there's a limit to what you can do with logic. For instance, there are limits to what you can do with the human mind, but the human mind is, we haven't come close to plumbing its limits yet. But what we have discovered is that there are limits to logic, just like, for instance, there are limits to things that you can do with a screwdriver. I mean, there are good things that you can do with a screwdriver, but unfortunately, there are some things that are beyond the capability of a screwdriver to fix. And mathematics is just a tool. It's a very important tool and a very powerful tool. And it's a tool that the sciences rely on. But science is itself a limited endeavor. Not everything can be known. And as a matter of fact, I think, if you look at the Eastern philosophies, one of the things that they tell you is that there are certain things which are going to be forever mysterious. And what is sort of interesting is that, hey, mathematics has confirmed that in the sense that there are going to be things which you suspect might be true. There are going to be things which you never suspect will be true, but there will be things that you suspect will be true that you will be able to prove, and there will be things that you will suspect will be true and you will never be able to prove them. In other words, they are going to be things that you think might be true, but you're never going to be able to nail it down. And that's life.
With that said, you're making the comment that there are things that can be proved and things that can not be proved. But can things that cannot be proved nonetheless be real?
That's exactly the point that I'm making. You see, you did understand. That's exactly the point. There are things that cannot be proved that are nonetheless real. And what that does is that means that they are beyond the power of science to establish. Now, is there another way we can establish them? I don't know, because I'm familiar with certain areas of mathematics, and in general I'm pretty familiar with mathematics because that's my job. I'm familiar with some science because I've always been very interested in science, and to some extent I'm a scientist wannabe. But I know almost nothing about the law. I know almost nothing about psychology, very little about politics, nothing at all about rap music, thank heavens. And there are a whole bunch of things that I don't know about. But what I do know is that there are things that are true in a mathematical sense that we will never be able to prove. That's unequivocal. That was established in the 1930s. What I believe is that because mathematics, the statements that mathematics makes, can be applied to the universe. That's how we established all these laws that enable us to construct all this wonderful technology that we all rely upon. If it weren't for the fact that Max Planck, the German physicist, had the idea for the quantum hypothesis, and it wasn't for all the work that physicists did to derive consequences of the quantum hypothesis, we wouldn't have computers, we wouldn't have MRI, we might have television. But there are a lot of things that go on in our world that we simply wouldn't have because it took physicists using mathematics in order to establish truth, which engineers could use to build stuff. Now, if there are truths that we suspect but cannot prove, well, then my feeling is that you might be able to talk an enterprising engineer into trying to build it. But my feeling is that if I were the CEO of a company and somebody came to me and said, hey, I've got this great idea. It's based on something that I can't really prove, but I think it's going to work. Well, if if it looked like it had a lot of promise and I could afford to take the loss, might be willing to make the investment. But I'm much happier trying to build something that I know will work. And if I'm building something based on something that might never work and I might never know whether or not it will work, I'm a little skeptical.
I mean, as you were talking, what was running through my mind was, if we never had math, one less class in school, and never had a way to build stuff, who we were and what the society was would be very different, and it would force us to go and utilize other areas of our being, so maybe our intuition would be more developed, or maybe, our connection with the planet. I mean, we would be very different people because what was important to us would be different as opposed to, studying these scientific and mathematical pursuits.
Well, these scientific and mathematical pursuits are responsible for the fact that I'm looking at a picture of you. You have very good teeth. And that's
I have good teeth, everybody.
Yeah, that's partially because of the fact that you have taken care of them, but it's also because of the fact that we have really good dentistry. And if you go to a primitive society which is not developed science, in general you'll discover that their teeth start falling out at a really early age. And it's not as much fun there because they haven't got Chinese takeout food. That's one of the major components of my life for a large period of time. They haven't got the internet. They haven't got television. What they do have is they do have a lot of disease. They do have short life expectancies. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm really happy that we got around to working out these problems with math and science. It's not just one less course in school. In fact, the reason that school exists is partially because they were able to build those large buildings, thanks to the fact that they know engineering and architecture sufficiently, again, courtesy of mathematics. Probably, if you were to look at every single facet of your day, the fact that it's better than it was if you were just living in a primitive society on a desert island and had nothing to eat but fish and coconut, which probably is a fairly healthy diet, but makes for a relatively uninteresting life. Practically every single facet of your day has been touched by the fact that we have developed mathematics and science. And if you want to live in a world without them, well, you're going to do it without me.
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to stir the pot here a little bit, and I don't mean to, but I don't know. You're just kind of like making me stir the pot, Jim.
Good. That makes for better shows, so I've been told.
Well, okay. And you might not be able to, well, I don't know. You seem like you'll have a comeback at me. You made the comment, and it really isn't about the Pythagorean theorem, but you made the comment that, the Pythagoras or the Pythagorean theorem was about, 300 or 500 years before Christ or whatever. Personally, I believe it came out of Egypt, but, that's my belief. But let's just say that Pythagoras is the one that understood right angles and, math really flowered during that whole Greek period, then how the heck did the Egyptians build the pyramids with no math and no physics?
First of all, they did have math. They had enough math to do the job. And as a matter of fact, there have been numerous, and first of all, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a historian.
I know, that's why that was the pot stirring part.
That's okay. The Egyptians had sufficient math to do it. They also, if you go back and look at their society, what they had done is, as far as I know, they didn't build the pyramids right out of the gate. Egyptian society was fairly well developed. They'd had a lot of experience, building stuff before they got around to the pyramids. Just as, for instance, you don't get in a 747 without having gone through the Wright brothers biplanes, propeller aircraft, and stuff like this. And not only that, we're a very intelligent species. So far as we know, we're the most intelligent species on the planet. What we do is we learn from our mistakes. We pass what we've learned down to the next generation. They had writing. There are a whole bunch of things that they had which made them a very effective society. And they also had, pardon my saying this because it's sort of uncomfortable, but they had a lot of manpower with which to build it, so they could afford to make a few mistakes.
it just makes me think of Moses. Last week we talked about Moses, and the whole Ten Commandments movie with the lady getting squished between the two bricks. Yeah, they had a lot of manpower. Anyway, I have to tell you, Jim, it's like I don't mean to be so campy with you, but for some reason I am. So just please excuse me.
Be my guest.
Okay, so you're talking about things that can be proved or not proved, but let's talk about a couple of different, pieces of this strange phenomena. What do you think about ghosts? One, do you think ghosts are real? And then two, do you think science or math will ever be able to prove the existence of a ghost haunting?
Quite frankly, I don't know whether ghosts are real or not. I've had no personal experience with them. I haven't even had secondhand experience in the sense that some of my friends have. I've had friends who've had various different aspects of paranormal experiences. I've never had a single paranormal experience in my life. But what I do believe is this. I do believe that if ghosts are ever shown to be a valid phenomenon, then what's going to happen is you're going to have departments of ghostology in the science departments of every major university, simply because what scientists love more than anything else is new phenomena to investigate. And so this brings up a very reasonable question. Well, why aren't they all over it at the moment? And there are a couple of reasons. Number one is that the payoff for it is, at this stage, relatively small, because science is a funded activity. And who funds science? Two groups fund science, either governments or companies, for the most part. Back in the 18th century, when scientists were just starting, what you had is you had a bunch of wealthy individuals who funded science on their own. But now every scientist needs to put food on the table and a roof over their heads. And so generally the money comes from governments or companies. And if you look at what governments or companies fund science for, they want a bottom line payoff. The government, for instance, let's take something that's very important. And I'm not saying that ghosts aren't important, but healthcare, I'd rather have good healthcare, quite frankly, than find out whether or not ghosts are a reality. And certainly a government is more interested in promoting programs that improve healthcare, because that will enable that government to stay in power longer, because people will vote for them saying, hey, they improved my healthcare. And a company is much more interested in funding healthcare than research into ghosts, because the company can develop drugs or programs which it can sell, make a profit, stay in business, which is what companies are supposed to do. So it's difficult for science, as things stand at the moment, to even tackle the phenomenon of ghosts, although there have been many scientists who have. During the latter portion of the 19th century, there was a phenomenon called spiritualism, which you may be familiar with. And there was something called the Psychical Research Society, which was founded in Britain and had many eminent scientists of the day looking into it. But basically what happened is they couldn't say, okay, these are real phenomena, that they could study the same way that they study, electricity or mechanics or gravity or stuff like that. And so I think you probably find that the vast majority of scientists don't feel really comfortable with saying that ghosts are an accepted phenomenon. As far as I'm concerned, there are a lot of phenomena in the paranormal area that I believe are subjectively real to a number of people. For instance, this isn't quite the ghost phenomenon, but it's something that interests people in this area. The idea of near-death experiences, and if you look at and read about near-death experiences, they happen to so many people. And they're so similar from people who have no contact with one another that it's a subjectively real phenomenon. It does happen to people. Now, the big question, I think, if I were a scientist and investigating this, what I would be interested in is there something going on that triggers this experience? And I think you might ask the same question about ghosts. When people feel that they see ghosts, is there something going on that triggers the experience of seeing ghosts? I think it's going to be hard at the moment to establish whether or not ghosts are real. It's not hard to establish that ghosts are subjectively real to a group of people. And I think it would be equally interesting to see whether or not there are a combination of circumstances that prompt people to see ghosts. Because I think that's something you can get your hands on. And going back to the near-death experience, my personal feeling about near-death experiences, because I'm a very non-spiritual person. I think I said in my book that one of my friends said that I was the least spiritual person that he had ever met, and I took that as a compliment. But my feeling about near-death experiences is they're absolutely real. They happen to so many people that something's going on here. But what I think is going on here is evolution. I think that near-death experiences come when we're in a near-death situation, that the body is doing all that it can to survive. And maybe what happens is there's some program in the recesses of our mind that's triggered that makes you experience these comforting sensations that make it more likely that you will survive this near-death experience. And evolution has selected for that in a form of natural selection. Those people who had near-death experiences, whereas loud noises and whistles and painful things went on, they died. So that isn't what near-death experiences are. Near-death experiences is what has survived after evolution. That's just my feeling, but I generally try to fit things into a scientific or logical framework because that's the particular way that I look at things.
But from your earlier example of, well, why would business or the government want to fund research into something like ghosts? But if you look at any of the paranormal phenomena, short of something like medical intuition or energy medicine, where you can at least charge money, but then it interferes with the whole AMA and pharmaceutical companies, so they get tossed back out anyway. There is no tangible results. Even studying near-death experiences, you can't make money off of studying near-death experiences now or down the road. It's really more about the human experience and understanding people than about making money.
That's not my position. First of all, as far as paranormal experiences are concerned, the government has funded research into it. It funded research into remote viewing during something called the Stargate Project, which existed during the 1970s. And you will hear, for instance, I think your guest during the last hour knows a lot more about this than I do. But
yeah, he started the program.
But I think that probably it was started in response to the fact that the Russians and Chinese had ongoing remote viewing programs going at the time. And we didn't want to lose the arms race to the Russians. We didn't want to lose the space race to the Russians. And if the Russians were undergoing remote viewing projects, we didn't want to lose the remote viewing race to them either. But the government did defund it. Make of that what you will. The fact is that the government, my government, throws an awful lot of money out the window. And so if it's not throwing money at this, my feeling is that it's reached the conclusion either it's gotten all that it can out of the project or it's decided that it's a dead end. But also another paranormal phenomena is telepathy. And here there's a definite payoff. And in fact, I think DARPA looked into the problem of trying to establish telepathy between soldiers in the field that could communicate danger mentally without sending up radio or any other sort of broadcast that might conceivably be intercepted by an enemy and might be received faster and able to react on it more. In fact, I think, if you were to look at the various different things that qualify as paranormal phenomena. I think there is money that can be made from some of them. Ghosts, I'm not sure. Maybe amusement parks. That's a difficult sell. But telepathy, very definitely. Precognition, boy, make a fortune in the market. In fact, destroy the market if there is such a thing as precognition, leading me to believe that maybe not, at least as far as the market is concerned, because the market is still there and people don't seem to be making money consistently on a precognitive basis. They study it for other reasons. But also, if you look at things like telepathy, I'm sure we could make money out of it. Near-death experiences, here's my feeling. If you study, my feeling is, I'm not a psychologist, but I think you could probably get a grant for studying near-death experiences on the basis that what you learned about being able to bring human beings through crisis situations, that's worth money. So there is value to these things. That's one of the reasons that I don't dismiss these things. I believe that that paranormal phenomena exist because of my understanding of mathematics and science. I can't tell you exactly what they are. Russell Targ in your previous section has a much clearer idea of what they are or what they may be because he's a physicist. And remember, the physicists go into the room and actually put out the fire. The mathematicians, they're just comfortable knowing that there's enough water to put out the fire. And that's where I stand on paranormal phenomena. But there's absolutely no question in my mind that if you were to do work on near-death experiences and establish conditions under which these experiences occur and lead to survival, you have something that's marketable. I'm buying it.
And I'm just trying to listen to your argument, because that's kind of not what people say, and this is their subjective experience, obviously, but that they'll get to the other side and that they're sent back or they're drawn back, and it has nothing to do with their will to necessarily want to come back. Many of them will make the statement they want to stay. And they don't want to go back, but they end up getting pulled back into their body, or, their family members will be like, it's not your time yet, go back.
Do you want my take?
Sure.
Oh, okay. As I said, I'm not a spiritual person. I have no idea whether there's an other side or not. In fact, there's an object called a Mobius strip in mathematics, which only has one side. There is no other side. So, as a result, the idea of other side, you have to be either religious or spiritual in order to accept that, and I'm not. But what I do believe is that these people are experiencing something. I believe that there is a common subjective reality here. Now, whether or not that common subjective reality is dictated by an objective reality in the sense that there is something going on in the brain that is common to all of them, that's my particular point of view. I think that there is something that's common that's going on in the brain that's on this side. That's because I don't believe that there is such a thing as another side. And I know that there was a book written recently called Proof of Heaven. I don't think there is such a proof. I believe that people can believe that there is such a proof. I can believe that these subjectively real experiences are absolutely real to these people. They happen so often that because I'm a scientist, I look for a logical explanation. Now, to me, other side is beyond something that I can comprehend. I don't understand what it is. I'm not spiritual, so it doesn't make any sense to me. Now, I'm not one of these Spock-type people who wanders around saying it does not compute. Yes, I understand what religions think of as heaven, and I hope there is such a thing. I hope that after this life passes, I qualify it, and, there's going to be a wonderful time up there, as the old Negro spiritual had it. But nonetheless, I look for reality that I can understand. And a reality that I can understand is something that's much more comfortable for me, than a possibility that is posed by a manner of looking at the universe, which, quite frankly, I don't understand. I don't understand. Not only am I not religious, I don't understand it. So it's very difficult for me to look at things from a religious standpoint. But what I do believe is that all these people have a sense of going somewhere and being pulled back. That's common. That's an objectively real thing, that they all have this sense of that. Now, a religious person would say, okay, there is another side. You're being pulled back because your family wills it. Your strength for survival is strong. It isn't your time yet. My feeling is that there's some hidden program in the brain. That's the way it operates. That's the way we look at it through our Western and possibly Eastern eyes of this is how we understand it. However, if you were to take somebody, for instance, because most of what's in our brain was in there for the Neanderthals, if you were to ask a Neanderthal about a near-death experience, they may interpret it very differently because they have a different context than we do. The context of other side being pulled back is something that is supplied to us by our understanding of religion. But somebody who does not have that particular viewpoint might see it totally differently. I don't know.
And it's possible. But I'm going to have to tell you, Jim, I think you need to, go have some experiences. Go hang out with a ghost hunting team and experience being, meeting a ghost, or take Russell Targa up and go take his class to see if you can do remote viewing. And, the near-death experience, I maybe would pass on that one myself. But because there really is, it really changes your perspective when you have these experiences. And it doesn't sound like you either, well, I don't want to say you haven't had the experiences, because you might have had the experiences and haven't realized you've had experiences.
I can certainly accept that. That's a possibility, but I'm probably a little older than you. I was alive during the 1970s. The 1970s, as you may recall, was the age of Aquarius. A lot of us had New Age ideas, New Age experimentation, and I had a few. I tried some of the New Age some of the New Age ideas. I tried to do some of these things, drew a total blank. Now, that might be because I went into it with a skeptical frame of mind. I think that in order to be an effective scientist, you have to be skeptical. Science is a very conservative enterprise. You have to jump over a pretty high bar for something to be accepted as scientific truth. And so maybe I went in with the wrong framework, and in order to see a ghost, you have to believe in ghosts. And I guess I went through the 70s. I emerged from it unscathed, and I was pretty skeptical about it. But as I say, I now have a different point of view, but my point of view is different from yours. You believe in these things, I gather, because you have experienced them. I believe that there are truths out there that I haven't experienced personally, that I might possibly get around to experience, although, quite frankly, I'm in my 70s, so what I'm really hoping for is lengthened lifespan, so that I do get to experience these, because I think they would be absolutely fascinating. But whether or not I'm willing to go on a remote viewing experience, as I said, been there, done that in the 1970s, not so interested now. What I'd be much more interested in is I would be much more interested in being part of a group that was trying to look at the underpinnings of near-death experiences, because I think this is something you can get your hands on. And even if I saw a ghost, Rita, I wouldn't necessarily believe in ghosts. I'd be much more likely to believe.
I hear you.
Yeah, I'd be much more likely to believe that some program has been triggered in my mind that establishes something that appears to me as a ghost. And as Russell said, In the last half hour, I think, in the half hour before, there are things that we don't have words for. There are lots of, there's an old joke about, about a bunch of people looking at this weird animal. Why don't we call it a hippopotamus? Because it looks more like a hippopotamus than anything else we've seen, and we don't have any word for it yet. Same type of thing. I mean, I think that if I were to see something of what might be described as an ectoplasmic nature, what I would say is, okay, the word that people use for these are ghosts, but all I see is, something, I'm not willing to accept the fact that this is the spirit of somebody who's crossed over. That's way beyond what I'm willing to accept. Now, there have been instances in which people have tried to set up scientific experiments with, quote, people who've crossed over. To the best of my knowledge, they've all drawn blanks. There have been people who said that they've been in communication, but they haven't been able to establish it to the satisfaction of science in general. So I guess...
Are you familiar with the work of David Rowntree?
I've heard the name, but I'm not familiar with him.
Okay. Apparently he knows you. But anyway.
Okay.
I mean, because I was he and I are friends, and, he made some comment because I had posted on Facebook. He was like, oh, you're having Jim Stein on, great guy. And, so he and I got talking. And I said, well, I was thinking, because I just finished his book, and I think I'm going to use some of your material because, you should check out some of the work that David's doing because he, by trade, he is a audio engineer, electrical engineer, some kind of engineer. And, but what he does ghost hunting, but he's not I'm just going to go into a location and take a bunch of pictures. He is really looking at it from a very scientific point of view.
Sure. Here's something that I firmly believe. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know. I think these things deserve investigation. Just because I don't believe in something doesn't make it, I have nothing to do with objective reality. There may well be ghosts. I don't believe in them. It's possible they exist, but here's what I want. There are a lot of really interesting questions out there. What makes life interesting for me is when there are answers found to interesting questions. So I sure hope that somebody goes out there and does something resembling a competent job of investigating this. And I hope also that they're willing to accept the fact that if it comes up empty, they'll tell us. That's, for instance, one of the things that I heard your guest say during the last hour is a lot of stuff about precognition. One of the things that bothers me is that these precognitive experiences that people say, well, I had this, and I've had this standard precognitive experience. I've woken up in the middle of the night and I've had a sense of alarm that something bad has happened to someone that I've loved or knew. So what I did was I made the phone call, found out everything was fine. And so do I post this on Facebook? No, for two reasons. First of all, I'm not a member of Facebook. Second of all, when you come up with an empty result, you don't tell people about it. It's like you read all these marvelous stories of dogs that find their way home from thousands of miles away. You never hear a story of the dog that was lost and never came home because it's not interesting. And this is what's known as the file drawer effect. And one of the problems with investigating paranormal phenomena is that only the really interesting stuff gets put on Facebook. The dull stuff, the time that you're worried about someone you love, you make the phone call, everything's fine, that never gets posted on Facebook. It's never part of a report because people aren't interested in negative results. Only the positive results get reported. And if David Rowntree is a good scientist, and if he's an audio engineer and making competent scientific studies, I have every reason to believe that he is. And my faith in him is just increased substantially when he said that something about me that was positive. So I have good feelings about him already. If he comes up with negative results, I hope he'll report those as well, because often the negative results that are part of the full picture need to be reported, and they're not.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that you do find in ghost hunting as it's evolving, because you're right, there's not any scientific study being done on it, but there are so many individual people that are doing work in the field, and I hate to just kind of stick on that, but, it's a good topic, that are trying to approach it from as scientific a viewpoint as they can. And many of them don't go in with the belief in there are ghosts. They're going in because they want to understand if it's a real phenomena. And so most groups are real keen to say, yeah, we went to this place and nothing happened, versus, oh my God, unlike Ghost Hunter on TV.
Yeah. That was what I was thinking of. But yes, I'm with you. I believe that people should investigate these things. And I hope they do. And not only that, I would really prefer that competent investigators do it. But you're not going to get funding for it. So someone or at least the funding will be sort of minimal. I can just see what would happen even in the days when the government was shoveling money at everything in sight, which they're not doing now. But I think if you'd written, I want to go out there and investigate ghosts, probably not going to get a grant. And I think if you were going to say, I want to go out and investigate near-death experiences, I come back to that because it is under the heading of paranormal phenomena. And I believe there's something there. I believe there's something worth investigating, and I believe there's something that could be of value. And I think you could get a grant to investigate. I mean, I don't know because I'm not a psychologist, but I would think that a reasonable project would be to try to find out what there is about these experiences that enable people to survive, because that's what we all want. We all want to be able to survive crises, and these experiences only happen in crises.
Well, yeah, because you're dying.
Yeah.
You just don't want to be a ghost. Because if it was a ghost in your world, you wouldn't even exist as a ghost. Jim, I'm sorry. I am just totally pulling your leg and everything.
That's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. It's your show.
I know, but I'm usually not this campy with my guests.
It doesn't matter to me. You're entertaining. You have good teeth. What more could you ask?
You didn't even say about my good hair. God.
Okay, I can't see that on my screen.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
good
just
teeth.
the teeth.
Good teeth. So in total, what were you hoping for people to get out of your book? Why should they buy it?
Great question. What I would hope that they would get out of it is that scientists have actually looked at this, legitimate scientists. They've come to essentially a mixed bag of conclusions, but there are reasons to suspect that there are phenomena out there that are beyond our ability to establish. And I think that's sufficiently interesting that it's worth looking at and worth reading about. And I think, I think that if people are looking for tales of the ghost hunters, they're not going to get it out of my book. But if they're looking for what is the record of good scientists investigating it, how does science go about investigating something like this? What are legitimate possibilities for paranormal phenomena from the standpoint of science, rather than from the standpoint of ghost hunters or something like that? Look at what science has to say about it. I do give a few of my own opinions, but basically what I do is I recount where science stands.
Excellent. And if they want to get a copy of your book, where would be the best place to send them?
Probably look up Paranormal Equation on Amazon, and that'll do it. Google it.
So is it on Kindle too, or just in paperback?
It's on Kindle as well. So
I didn't realize how popular Kindle was, and I released a book in October, and
it's great.
and people were like, "Is it on Kindle? Is it on Kindle?" And I'm like, "No, but I can make it be." Anyway, Jim, it was very nice having you on. I liked our little bantery debate today, and thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom with my listeners.
Rita, it was a pleasure, and best of luck to you and your show in the future. Thanks again.
All right, thank you. All right, bye, Jim. That is Jim Stein. His webpage is www.jim.stein.csulb, I think.
.edu.
.edu. Well, there were all those letters, and I'm like, anyway.
Actually, it's an email address. jim.stein@csulb.edu. I teach in the math department at California State University, Long Beach. That's how you can send me an email.
All right. And then next week, we have William John Megan talking about the mysteries and esoteric teachings of the Sistine Chapel. And in the second hour, we have a good friend of the show. We have E. Gray Lowermere talking about In Search of Mr. or Mrs. Right. So until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. If you haven't signed up for the Medical Intuition and Energy Medicine Training Program, now's your chance because it's on sale till the end of the month. And then till next week, be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio.